This is the world according to Jen and Carolyn.
Good evening.
Good evening, Jennifer.
It's October. So we'll talk like Dracula. No, we won't. All right. So tonight we're going to be talking about early psychiatric hospitals, asylums, and the treatment of the mentally ill in the U.S. specifically. So part uno, it's going to be a two-parter. And so, I don't know what you think of when you hear the word asylum. Carolyn, what do you think of?
I think of the beginning part of the movie Amadeus.
Yes.
And feeling like completely creeped out as a young kid, not knowing what that beginning scene with what the hell's
Salieri.
I keep forgetting.
Yeah.
He's in a mental institution.
Yeah.
He's in an asylum, and it looked creepy to me, and my mom had to explain to me like what that was.
Yeah.
I love the movie Girl Interrupted. Horror movies always had, like, anytime it was in an asylum.
Yeah, American Horror Story. Yeah. Yeah.
That's my thoughts on that.
That makes sense. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, there are so many extremely messed up movies and documentaries about these notorious institutions. And so we decided to do, I was trying to stifle a burp. How disgusting am I? Sorry, guys. I'm really gross. I've had a lot of Mexican food tonight. So this is going to be a two-parter. And, today we're going to focus on the history of these dismal places and early mental health interventions, which were brutal to say the least. And then in part two, we're going to discuss something that's really near and dear to our heart. It's very personal to us. We're going to discuss the mental health crisis in our city, San Francisco, and ask the question, really. We'll talk about how we got to where we're at with so many mentally ill folks living on the street. And also ask the question, what would creating a kinder, gentler version of an institution to provide permanent shelter and support to those suffering from really severe and debilitating mental illness? What would that look like? Is that possible? Is it the right solution? Yeah. So, Carolyn, do you want to give any sort of preface about what we're going to talk about tonight?
Well, as I did a lot of did some of the research for this. I didn't do a lot of it. You did a lot of it. I was thinking, this is also terrible. Oh my God, what were these people thinking? Well, that could easily be said if in 20 years someone looks back at us now. So I want to at least sort of comment, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
Some of these people, I don't know what they were thinking.
Sure.
They didn't know shit.
Yeah.
They were. I don't want to assume they had ill intentions necessarily. Not everyone. It's what they knew, but I also think this is a call to action.
Yeah.
That if you aren't aware of some of these things, I hope we're motivating you to do your own research. I'm also hoping that this helps us become part of a conversation and legislation and activates you to do something to help create change.
For sure. Absolutely. And, here's the deal, guys. We aren't experts, but we do live in San Francisco. That's not the part that, gives us a little more insight. We've seen some shit here, but, this is a place, as I said, that's absolutely notorious for mentally ill people just living on the street. I passed a woman with no shoes on talking to herself today on Market Street. And that's a daily occurrence. I see this stuff on a daily basis. Yeah. Absolutely unacceptable. And Carolyn is a clinician after all, so she has that insight. And I've spent a fair amount of time working in supportive housing, specifically with folks who have both mental health challenges and substance use disorder. And I think that these factors combined give us a little bit of insight, probably more than the average Jill or Joe. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's always important to start with history. And so we are going to talk first about kind of the history of mental illness, the way people were treated, and how we ended up with these things called institutions and asylums in the U.S. So I'd like to thank the National Institute of Health for this succinct timeline. Makes my job easier. I know they have
brilliant.
It's amazing
Very
stuff.
well researched.
Amazing stuff. Yeah, I mean they're kind of top dogs. They funded tons of the work that was going on at Stanford when I was there. Surprise. So all right, let's go back to ancient Egyptian, Indian, Greek, and Roman writings where mental illness was categorized as a religious or personal problem, punishment, or demonic possession. In 5th century BC, we have Hippocrates, who the father of medicine, right? The Hippocratic Oath, was a pioneer in treating mentally ill people with techniques not rooted in religion or superstition. Instead, he focused on changing a mentally ill patient's environment or occupation or administering certain substances as medications. That seems pretty cutting edge.
Plant medicine.
Yeah.
And steam baths.
Give me some milk of the poppy.
Yeah.
The Middle Ages, the mentally ill were believed to be possessed or in need of religion. So we're going right back to religion. 1752, the Quakers, love the Quakers in Philadelphia, were the first in America to make an organized effort to care for the mentally ill. And the newly opened Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia provided rooms in the basement. Oh, why the basement? Complete with shackles. Oh, you get some shackles attached to the walls to house a small number of mentally ill patients. In 1773, to deal with mentally disturbed people who were causing problems in the community, the Virginia legislature provided funds to build a small hospital in Williamsburg. Over the years, the hospital grew in size as needs arose, but remained within the historic area of the city until the 20th century, when a new hospital was built in a suburb. Today, it's Eastern State Hospital. You got to get these people away from the city.
I was going to say, as you're looking at this timeline, you're seeing things go from rural to cities.
Right.
And that's interesting.
And then moving these folks back to rural environments out of sight.
I don't want to look at you.
Right. Well, that was the whole purpose of these in the beginning, was to remove these problematic, quote unquote, people from society so that nobody had to deal with them. So in 1792, the New York hospital opened a ward for curably insane patients. And in 1808, a freestanding medical facility was built nearby for the humane treatment of the mentally ill. In 1821, a larger facility called the Bloomingdale Asylum was built in what's now the Upper West Side. So yeah, that had to be moved. In 1894, it was moved further away. This is into White Plains, a suburb, and is currently under operation as the Payne Whitney Westchester Hospital. It's a division of the New York Hospital Cornell Wheel Medical Center. Okay. 1817, Philly again, the Asylum for the Relief of Persons Deprived of the Use of Their Reason.
Oh my God, these names.
I should be there. Was opened under Quaker auspices as a private mental hospital. It actually continues to serve this function to this day as the Friends Hospital. Oh, the Quakers, they do good work. I walked by their building today, actually. It's right by my, it's Black Lives Matter in big letters. I love them. 1824, the Eastern Lunatic Asylum was opened in Lexington, Kentucky, as the first mental institution west of the Appalachian Mountains. It still operates today under the name Eastern State Hospital. I guess the Lunatic Asylum didn't stick. I don't know why. 1890, every state had built one or more publicly supported hospitals. And by the mid 20th century, the hospitals housed over 500,000 patients, but began to diminish in size as new methods of treatment became available. So that's kind of the early days. And then came this dude, Benjamin Rush. Not then came this dude. He was like right smack in the middle of this shit. But he's generally viewed as the father of modern psychiatry. Did you learn about this guy when you were getting your master's? No. It's probably good. I think he was an interesting fellow, to say the least. He was a signer on the Declaration of Independence.
I didn't know that.
It's kind of dope. I didn't know that either. Yeah, that was something I found out.
Sounds very 1776.
Yeah. Yep, totally. And in 1783, he joined the staff of the Pennsylvania Hospital. Lots of action at this Pennsylvania hospital. And in 1787, he was formally given charge of all these mentally ill folks who had, until that time, just been kept in this cold-ass, dark basement.
Awesome.
Yeah. So at least he had the humanitarian insight to install stoves to keep them warm. Actually brought them around to walk around, like gave them some sunlight. I know, cutting edge. But these were the early days. And treatments included some crazy shit like bleeding, purging of the bowels. I do that every day anyway. Coffee. That's for me, not for him. Induced vomiting, blistering of the skin, cold air, water, and using cold air, water, and ice to induce the cold, and an administration of mercury, some shit I can't even pronounce. Antimony. I don't even know. Quinine, opium, digitalis.
Isn't that a heart medicine?
I think it is. Yeah. I could be wrong. And more. It sounds terrible, but again, these were the medical interventions of the time. Yeah, totally common. Totally common. But he was also a racist. And he thought one of his many racist beliefs.
Unlike all the signers of the Declaration.
Right? I know. There's a theme here. But he thought that a slave's desire to be free was a result of mental illness. Okay. Whatever, bro.
How did this seem to work into a patriarchal misogynistic agenda?
Yes. No, absolutely. Tonight, I don't know if it's too soon, but I taught my 5-year-old about Columbus Day. He came home. He's like, it's Columbus Day weekend. Columbus Day. And I was like, let me tell you about Columbus. I tried to use the most mild terms possible.
He got it.
He got it. When Carolyn came to the door, he's like, Auntie Carolyn, Columbus murdered mamas and papas and babies. I was like, oh, that's my kid. So, there were also people who were like, I don't like what's going on. Good. The way these people are being treated is absolutely abysmal, and I want to do something about it. And one of these people was this woman named Dorothea Dix. Were you familiar with her?
Yeah, we studied her.
Super cool. So she was instrumental in founding or expanding more than 30 hospitals for the treatment of the mentally ill. She totally believed that people could be cured. They could get better, because most of these places were like, oh, these people are incurably insane. They're going to be there here for the rest of the. Yeah, let's lock them up. Let's chain them up. Let's treat them terribly. Let's cut out parts of their body, their brain, etc. She was like, no, that's not cool. She volunteered to teach Sunday school classes for female convicts at East Cambridge Jail. During her visits, she saw people with mental illness who had been treated like shit, and she was like, I have to do something. And so what she did was the only thing that politically a woman could do at the time. She wrote something called a memorial to the state legislator. And it's basically a pamphlet. And it was the only means by which a woman could participate in political life in America at the time.
Awesome.
Yeah. So she was doing the thing. And
there's always someone who's like, fuck this shit.
Yeah.
I love that.
They paved the way for us.
There's always someone who's like, fuck no.
Yeah. And she was that person. And then came another woman named Nellie Bly. And Nellie actually went undercover.
This is dope.
Yeah, at the Blackwell Island Insane Asylum in New York in 1887. And not only was Bly committed without much of an examination to determine her sanity, but the conditions here were harsh, cruel, and inhumane. And she came out and she wrote about it and told everybody about it and was like...
There's been a lot of movies about her, too.
Really?
I feel like I've seen a movie about her.
Oh, man. I didn't even know until I started doing this research. And then there was somebody named Henry Cotton. He's not a badass. He's actually kind of a piece of shit. This is from a Talkspace article. He was the superintendent at New Jersey's Trenton State Hospital from 1907 to 1930, so not that long ago. And he thought that infected parts of the body led to mental illness. So he pulled rotting teeth, which is probably a good thing. You want to pull those rotting teeth out. But he thought that they caused madness-inducing infections. But now there's actually a lot of correlation, a lot of like legitimate scientific evidence that shows that like bad mouth health has an effect on your body. So maybe it wasn't too far off.
It's simplistically, again, I'm going to mention the show The Nick on Showtime, which is phenomenal if you are interested in this whole thing. But something's wrong with my head.
Yeah.
That's what's making me sick. Therefore, anything in my head could be the cause.
Yeah.
Like, that was just how they portrayed it.
Let's just start removing parts until we figure it out.
That's literally what they thought.
Lobotomy.
Like, oh, this, or this. I mean, we really haven't come very far.
It's pretty primitive.
Yeah.
And so, when taking people's teeth out of their head didn't work.
Weird.
So he would like start to go into the tonsils. He'd remove those. He began removing parts of the stomach, small intestines, appendixes, gallbladders, thyroid glands. This motherfucker just went ham. And unsurprisingly,
clutter-free body equals mental sanity.
Yes, I didn't need that appendix.
Also, I feel so bad laughing at him.
I know. I think no.
This is how I deal with discomfort.
This is how we process, because this is some pretty terrible stuff. And so I think some levity is needed to kind of get through this, because it's only going to get worse, folks. Hang in there. But unsurprisingly, the things he was doing didn't prove to be a reliable cure, and surprise, carried a really high mortality rate. Weird. And then came something far more humane. Well, significantly more humane, called the Kirkbride Plan. Did you learn about this?
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a focused type of treatment focused on humane treatment and access to the outdoors, sunlight, and at least 10 Kirkbride clinics are still around today. And back in the day, these facilities, because it was the time, also used shitty methods like hydrotherapy. Patients are wrapped in wet sheets and left to soak in tubs for hours. Just fucking straight waterboarding people. Yeah. Crazy shit.
Well, and it's funny to me too. This just occurred to me, farming had been around long before half of this shit. And when you say humane treatment, people are treating their livestock and their animals better.
Yeah.
This is
because they were a means of production and a means of making money.
Absolutely. And so just in my head too, as I'm thinking of this, I'm like, what a disregard for the humanity of these people.
Yeah.
They were considered useless and a nuisance and a problem to be thrown away.
Yeah. Yeah. Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And who cares? Let's experiment on them. Yeah. Oh God, it's terrible.
It
and so, even though there were reformers, the 1900s were still hell.
Yeah.
There's an article I found on a site called Open Counseling that kind of went through some of the worst trends, beginning in 1907 with forced sterilization. That was big. 1927 and beyond, they did this thing called insulin induced comas. I had never heard about this, but apparently one doctor inadvertently overdosed a patient who had like a morphine addiction or an opium addiction. And then when they awoke, they're like, I'm cured. I'm not craving drugs anymore. And so this person decided to systematically start using that as a treatment plan, but it was super dangerous. Like, I don't know, people would die. Like you slip into a coma. It's a pretty significant risk of death. Yeah. So they were doing shit like that.
Well, a lot of this too, think about being a person of color and the forced sterilization that was going on in enslaved population.
Yeah.
Women and
or forced reproduction.
Forced reproduction. And in the Native American population, I talk about experimentation.
Yeah.
That probably isn't even, it is documented. But I think of the shit that isn't even fucking documented.
For sure. And then subsequently taking your children and taking them to schools run by like missionaries and shit.
Yeah, fuck that.
God, yeah, we could talk about this stuff all night. And then in the 1930s, electroconvulsive therapy became a thing. It started in Italy. It was used in the U.S. well into the 40s, and it's actually still used today, and with some success, right?
Actually, it's one of the. It's still a protocol if you have severe depression, like you are suicidal, schizophrenic, bipolar. But again, it's a last resort.
Yeah.
It's done way differently now.
Yeah.
But it still is used as a modality.
They don't put a bit in your mouth and just like.
Well, and again, the research that I looked up said it's still 80% effective.
Oh.
I would like to do.
How do you determine effectiveness?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And also, what's the longevity of effectiveness?
Right.
So,
right. How often do I need to be shocked in the brain?
I'm not a computer. I don't get rebooted.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating.
Our brain is not a computer in that sense.
Right.
You can't just reboot it.
Yeah.
But if you're about to kill yourself versus get this, I suppose it's the less. I don't know.
I guess you try anything. And speaking of the brain, 1936, that's when we had the first lobotomy. So if you're not familiar with lobotomy, that's deliberately damaging neural connections in the prefrontal cortex area of the brain thought to cause mental illness.
Through the eye.
Yep. Basically turned you into a zombie. Remember, if you guys have seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, what they did to, what's his face? Jack Nicholson's character. Yeah. Oh, fuck, I just gave away the movie.
Spoiler alert. And
Yeah.
you use an ice pick, and it usually was done not under anesthesia.
Oh, that's so primitive, dude. Oh my God. And then in the 1950s. So 1950s, there was a bit of a shift. Not that things got like instantly better, but the development of antipsychotic drugs, a big push for deinstitutionalization. We'll talk about the pros and cons of that. And outpatient treatment began in many countries, including the U.S., facilitated by the development of a variety of antipsychotic drugs. So, deinstitutionalization efforts have reflected a largely international movement to reform the asylum-based mental health care system and move toward community-oriented care, which on paper sounds really good.
Absolutely.
Sounds really good. But we're going to get into why it hasn't turned out to be the promise that it was supposed to be.
Right. Well, and a lot of the antipsychotics that were developed, we're still using today.
Yeah.
And it's a stopgap. It's not going to do it. Again, it's I think we're on the verge of what I hope will be a really cool transition in mental health and psychiatry, and trying to make it more systemic, more well-rounded. I think the 1950s, again, you're seeing more science come in.
Yes.
And people actually saying like, I don't know about this.
You weren't cutting out people's spleens no more. You weren't removing tonsils and like. But one thing that is pretty disgusting is the treatment of women.
Surprise.
Yeah, and there's a lot. There's a lot, and. This was back in the day when women, like their husbands could be like, oh, my wife is acting up. And they'd be like, all right, let's commit her forever.
Well, think of what a schizophrenic woman would present as. She'd be outspoken.
Right.
Her disease would make her such that she's going to be a threat to any man.
Yeah.
And any patriarchy.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about women and the treatment of women, particularly around, mental health and institutionalization.
Well, again, the most famous thing is the hysteria. And I think a lot of people kind of use that word, in modern day when we say someone's acting hysterical. We think, oh, they're being frenzied, frantic, anxious, out of control. Well, the root of hysteria, hyster is the word for uterus. I think you have a hysterectomy. And so it's really, this is going to tie back to Freud. Sorry, Freud.
Fuck you, Freud.
Well,
He had his good days and his bad days.
But I also want to note too, the DSM only in the 1980s removed hysteria. So it's not even less than 50 years. As a society, we've agreed that this is not a female problem.
Right. White women or white men, you're not moving fast enough on changing these things.
So, again, women were seen as something to be protected. Historically, we're weak, we're feeble, we're influenced by the occult and supernatural things. And,
period-related madness.
Yeah, and hey, if you're not procreating, something's wrong.
Yeah.
You're in a front, you're not participating. I also, through a lot of this, I hear, again, how could a woman possibly resist a man? How could a woman possibly not conceive? How could a woman possibly not be attracted to a man? So it's a lot of like anti-lesbian, anti-feminist, anything, or just lesbian. So dudes were pretty obsessed with a woman's uterus, and not just the uterus, but how it was positioned. And if it wasn't positioned just so, which modern science tells us it kind of doesn't really matter. You might have certain reproductive challenges if you have a tilted uterus. But if your uterus was weird, it made you mad. Because not only were our uterus is weird.
Mad like British mad.
They migrated. Like, Jen, you're being crazy. That must be your uterus up in your brain.
I got a ghost uterus.
Your uterus has travel plans.
Spectral uterus.
So dudes were just super obsessed with like how a uterus, they also have this idea of like, men are dry and warm and uteruses are wet and like more prone to diseases and like abnormal. I know it's literally fucking stupid when you think about it. But anyway, so men really said, hey, if a woman can't have an orgasm, that's a problem. And if she's not attracted to penises, that's weird. And it must be because her uterus is confused.
Can't have an orgasm strictly from penetration, probably like a jackhammer. Yeah.
Right.
Because that always works.
Dudes weren't skilled in this shit either.
No.
So gosh. So
not back in the day.
I thought it's not funny, but it made me crack up. So women, this guy, the Argonaut Melopus, that's his name. I don't know how to say his name. He was a physician, and is considered to be the founder of basically in Greek times of this concept. He couldn't understand that women would refuse to, quote, honor the phallus, and they would flee to the mountains, and their behavior was mad. Honor my phallus.
He's got puss in his name. Motherfucker thinks he knows everything about us. Jesus Christ.
So, so again,
I'd run to the mountains too. Shit.
I'd be like, fuck your stinky ass farmer dick.
Wash your balls, bro. Maybe that would make me stick around.
Oh, right?
Gross.
So there's so much information on this, but Freud is the one that we really want to focus on.
Good.
What he did. So Freud believed that women experience hysteria. So Freud actually was interesting because he also thought men could have it too.
Okay.
But he tied it back in, if you've ever heard of the Oedipal complex or the Electra complex.
Tell us about that.
Oedipus, what was that? Homer's?
I don't know. It's not Homer, but I don't think.
Sorry. We can only do so much.
It's some Greek shit, I think. I don't know.
Oedipus had a crush on his mother, fell in love with his mother and killed his father.
Yeah.
Electra, the opposite, fell in love with her father, resented her mother. And Freud had this concept that you kind of, boys favor their mother, girls favor their father, and that's sort of our primary attachment. That's how we form the basis of healthy sexual relationship, which isn't 100% off.
Okay.
But it's not 100% on too. So Freud kind of could say like, okay, both men and women could have hysteria, but he really made it a problem with women that women are hysterical because they are reconciling the fact that they don't have a penis. And the only way that they could exist in harmony is if they're either married to a penis or they have a penis from a son.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So
I'm harmonious.
Jen, you're as harmonious as fuck.
When the moon is in the By the way, Oedipus is a Greek tragedy where I think this kid was adopted, and the dad, the king, raised him as his son, but he grew up and murdered his adopted dad and married his mother. There you go.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Awesome.
Drop some knowledge.
So anyway, so women are, longing for wieners, which I wouldn't mind having one for a day.
Hey, I long for the D, but it doesn't mean that I'm crazy because I don't possess my own D. Yeah. Although I've always said to have one for a day, I think would be fascinating.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to see what that's like.
Oh, I would love to see what that's like.
Yeah.
Too. Anyway, so he really said that, this is, women are anxious. It has nothing to do with your uterus. You're not receiving male semen. Therefore, you're going to be fucked up. I
need that seed to prevent madness.
So what Freud did, and this kind of, again, this is where it gets a little bit very inappropriate.
Yeah.
Is he would say, hey, doctors, you need to massage women's uteruses. You need to massage their vaginas.
Oh, God.
You got to rub these things. Get them going again. Get the woman interested in a phallus. Get her reconnected. But this is, again, fucking hilarious. All the men were like, my hand's tired from doing this. This is long and exhausting. And
you're not doing it right. And you also probably weren't good to look at, so we weren't quick to make it fast for you.
How was your day? Oh, I had to masturbate 50 women and I'm really tired. So someone at some point said, hey, let's hand this off to machinery, and here comes the vibrator.
Yes.
But anyway, again, this caused insane amount of trauma and harm. This is often intensely painful.
Oh,
I think downright abusive, unethical, and
totally.
Basically, the sexual nature of these treatments were completely disregarded, which is insane to me.
Yeah.
And again, none of these symptoms were seen as problematic in man. So if a man came for the same, so you're seeing these gender stereotypes. Again, the idea that women are supposed to be a certain way, and if they complain about something, or if they're not even tempered, or if they're sexually inhibited, or too sexually aggressive, something's wrong with them. But in a man, no biggie.
Yep.
No biggie.
We would have been screwed during this time.
Especially me.
We would have been institutionalized.
Oh my God.
You're a spinster.
I would have become a prostitute. I'd be a
sex worker.
Totally.
Yeah.
I would have been an old timey one too.
We would have run brothels together.
Oh, you'd be a great Mata.
I think I would be really good at it.
Yeah.
Mad respect.
Yeah. That's what's up, guys.
Yeah. That's some heavy stuff. Women are always bearing the brunt of these types of primitive and abusive practices in our society. And always it's women of color who get it far worse than any of us.
But in non-shamanic culture base, like
yes.
in American society, again, any other culture, women are revered.
Yeah.
Women are seen as the matriarchs.
Right.
Not in puritanical or British or
Anglo. Yeah.
The word is white.
Yeah. European.
Right.
Yeah. European,
so
Anglo.
Fear, I think, of women power.
Yeah.
We are fucking magical.
Totally.
We bleed with the moon, bitches. what's more badass and gangster than that?
I know. It's pretty great. Yeah. I think they do fear us. So, we go from that craziness and
so vibrators is psych therapy too.
At least something good came out of that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's an empowering tool.
Yeah.
Like something that was used as kind of an abusive tactic has now become literally a tool of empowerment to where we're like, oh, we actually don't need guys. Yeah, we can do this. I could do this by myself, by my own, as my 5-year-old would say. And so now we move to 1963.
Your 5-year-old.
I know I shouldn't have brought him into this, but it is really funny that instead of saying I could do this by myself, he always says I could do this by my own.
That's sweet.
It's pretty cute. Anyway, so in 1963, we're jumping to 1963 now. So JFK signed something called the Community Mental Health Centers Act. And this law created federal funding that the states could use to build and maintain community mental health centers. It sounds really good, right? Medicaid, which passed in 1965, created financial incentives for states to prioritize community-based over institutional treatment. And in the following decades, psychiatric institutions, they closed in large numbers, while those remaining reduced the number of treatment beds that they held. So here's a reason, probably the primary reason I can think of, why a lot of these places were terrible and shouldn't have existed in the first place. So, even though laws were created to protect people from abuses and these terrible conditions,
those tend to work well, right?
Right.
Why would anyone abuse their power?
Yeah, I know.
Money.
I know. Well, this is before we get to that. So, if anybody remembers Geraldo.
I do.
So we grew up with Geraldo.
I loved him.
Yeah, he was awesome when we were young. Now he's a Fox News pundit, and I'm not really into that. Though he does vigorously defend the immigrant, primarily Latinx immigrant community, which is dope. But he's still a right-wing pundit anyway. But he used to be. Back in the day, he started out as a lawyer. He's half Jewish and half Cuban. And he was a lawyer for this group called the Young Lords. They were basically like the Latino Black Panthers in New York. They're badass. And then he became an investigative journalist. This is before he had his own show, The Geraldo Show, where he was getting beat up by Nazis, which is also kind of badass. I don't know if you know this. I learned about it on a Howard Stern interview. I don't know if he still has it, but he got the Star of David tattooed across his knuckles. Cool. Because he was a bruiser. Like he grew up in New York, I think the Bronx. I can't remember exactly, but he was like, I'm going to be the tough Jew. He's like, when I'm beating people's asses for being anti-Semitic, he's like, they're going to see the Star of David coming at them. Yeah, I know, right? He was a badass back in the day. So, anyway, he was an investigative reporter, and so he looked he blew the lid wide open on this place called the Willowbrook School. So from 1930 to 1983, there was a school on Staten Island, the Willowbrook School. It was state funded. It was an institution for children with intellectual disabilities. And this place had a bad reputation. And by 1965, it was overcrowded as all hell. They housed over 6,000 children, despite having a maximum capacity of 4,000. This place was so bad that when RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, toured the institution in 1965, he proclaimed that the individuals in this overcrowded facility were living in filth and dirt, their clothing in rags, in rooms less comfortable and cheerful than the cages in which we put animals in the zoo.
Children.
These are children, you guys. And he offered a series of recommendations for improving conditions. And before Geraldo, right before Geraldo, there was a woman, a reporter named Jane Curtin. And she was actually the first reporter to write a story about this shit. And her and Geraldo in 1972 teamed up and they blew the lid off this shit. And Geraldo, again, badass, stole a key and snuck into the facility, I think in the night, to get footage, which he turned into an expose called The Last Disgrace. And this expose garnered national attention, and it earned Geraldo a Peabody Award and resulted in a class action lawsuit. I think it was brought by the ACLU on behalf of the parents of the kids who were in this place. And Rivera described the place as a kennel for humanity disguised as a school. And the publicity generated by this case, which was a major contributing factor to the passage of a federal law, the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act of 1980. And the school officially closed in 1987. And now everyone knew that the institution was no way to care for this population. It absolutely began the end of the institutional era that existed since Bedlam and the United Kingdom in the 19th century. This is what Geraldo said. And I mean, this dude he was a retired NYPD detective, wrote a book called The Soul of a Cop in 1981. And he talks about going into one of the buildings, an abandoned building at the Willowbrook campus, and just seeing like biohazards and chemicals everywhere, explosives, a room full of jars containing specimens of human organs.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. And he goes on to actually write that the incident was largely covered up by local officials. So people knew what was going on at this place. I'll link stuff about it, but I've seen footage of the documentary once and I can never watch it again.
Even hearing it makes
I mean, I
can't.
It's like
that.
Children chained to radiators and like it's so bad, you guys. It's so bad. And yeah, we'll circle back to this, but you know, these poor folks who got moved out of Willowbrook, you think, okay, they're going to go into better conditions. Things are going to get better for them. But I found a New York Times article just from 2020, a couple of years ago. And they said it was in 2019, there were 97 reported allegations of physical abuse by group home workers against Willowbrook alumni, according to international state data obtained by the Times. So these folks who had all gone primarily to separate group homes in various parts of the country, they were being abused.
Well, and this is something we haven't touched on too, and I don't know if we're going to, but you know, look at the kinds. These are underpaid positions.
Yeah,
they're considered not. You work in a cancer treatment facility. You're going to have state of the art, high tech, highly educated, highly paid.
Yeah,
insurance paid. You look at a mental institution. You're going to have underpaid people who are not qualified. I work with people on the spectrum. I work with neurodivergent people, and they have wonderful caretakers and caregivers.
Because they can afford it.
Group homes.
Yeah.
But I've also seen the other side of it.
Yeah.
I've seen caregivers on the, you know, again, it's no different than I think what we're looking at in nursing homes as well.
Right.
And these are, you know, again, when you have a population that's vulnerable, they're going to be the most susceptible to abuse because no one cares.
Right. A lot of these folks don't have families who are looking out for them, or at least able to look out for them on a regular basis. And, I think, yes, improving the pay and the training and the education around these positions would significantly improve conditions in these places.
And these people didn't choose to be sick.
No.
They're sick.
No. Or intellectually,
they can't help it.
Yeah.
And
no.
Why would you? I mean, just again, this is why we're not fucked up people. But it never makes sense to me. If anything, it's very, 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 very upsetting.
It's so bad. I also saw that, what did it say? There were also 34 allegations of psychological abuse and hundreds more of neglect and other mistreatment, like improper use of restraints. Oh, well, that was alleged at Willowbrook.
Oh, I'm sure.
These are children. And there were allegations, which I'm sure were legit, that some of the staff members were sexually abusing the patients. It is fucked up. And it's really unfortunate, you guys. And that there are a lot of people out there, or at least enough to make my skin crawl, who deliberately seek out these positions so that they can prey on the vulnerable. They're predators, and it's deliberate. But yeah, the group homes, just understaffed, poorly trained employees. And this is where we're at today. And, psych hospitals today, which there aren't many in existence in San Francisco. What do we have? We have General, which is temporary. And I don't know how many psych beds are even there offhand.
It's very hard to find. And I know the Jewish Home for the Aged used to have a psych ward, and I think St. Mary's. Yeah. For adolescents, but it's very difficult to find. It's very difficult to hold someone.
Yeah. Yep. We've gone the opposite way. And I understand why, when we're looking at a case like Willowbrook, why there would be legislation, why there would be a call to action to say, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
We need kinder, gentler, supportive, humane treatment. Yeah. But we're not there.
Well, and it's put on the family.
Yes.
Which, it's hard enough being a mother. Yeah. Can you imagine being a parent with other siblings and one of your children is mentally ill?
Well, that's why a lot of parents sent their kids to Willowbrook. They talk. Yeah. In one of the articles I was reading, they were talking about a woman who's now an adult, severe intellectual disabilities. Yeah. She had 14 kids. She could not, and was extremely low income in New York, and could not care for all the children, and said, you know what, Willowbrook seems like a fine place. I'm going to put my child there. She was assured her daughter was going to get the support that she needed to thrive. She was so badly abused. And these are helpless people. The families are helpless, and what about the folks who don't have any family? And that's what we'll talk about in the next episode.
Our education system is not set up.
No.
Everything's very separated.
Everything is very separated. So psych hospitals today, or whatever it is that we're utilizing to help people, they now specialize in acute treatment and stabilization. And the average length of stay in a psychiatric hospital is about 10 days. And, deinstitutionalization, it was made possible by modern psychiatric medications, specifically antipsychotic medications. It helps people recover from psychotic episodes relatively quickly, but you got to take your medicine consistently. Yeah. And if you're not, you're just going to relapse. You're just going to continue to have psychotic episodes, which we see every fucking day in the streets of San Francisco. People having legitimate mental health crises, psychotic episodes.
Well, and we have social workers, we have marriage family, we have therapists, people who are trained also. There was no talk therapy. Yeah. And so we can say to someone who's schizophrenic, and if they're on their meds, absolutely. Yeah. Talk therapy can be helpful, but also other systems have to be in place. And I just don't think our capitalist society there's no value.
No. And as a therapist, and I was reading the stats on this, but mental health professionals are the largest group of health professionals who don't accept insurance. Yeah. And it's because, and this, how freaking difficult it is to get paid. Yeah. And so it's really challenging to take those pro bono clients because you're just not going. It's the system. It's the insurance system.
6 months in community mental health. Yeah. I couldn't take it. It was so frustrating, and it was so time consuming. Yeah. It was so stupid. On paper, and what you needed to do in order to get these people who actually weren't even mentally ill to the point that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But it was exhausting
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
I couldn't handle it.
Right. I mean, imagine, and I'm sure you've seen this, somebody who needs immediate life-saving treatment, and there's all these bureaucratic measures in place that you have to go through before you can even get them treatment. It's insane to me. And, you know, I get this, and I think it makes sense. And you're a mental health professional. We mental health professionals now believe that long-term recovery should take place in outpatient and community clinics where people can receive medication, therapy, rehabilitative services to help them improve their functioning while living at home. That's the ideal.
Well, yeah, but again, that's like getting mad at someone with cancer because they don't have the energy to go to chemo.
Yeah.
Part of their disease makes it such that they're not going to be able to do that without support.
Right.
And we do not have support.
Right.
And the support systems we have are shit.
Yeah.
And they're not all, and again, not all of them.
Yeah.
I think there are good people out there. I think there are, but it's few and far between. And in my opinion, it's more accessible to wealthy populations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. I mean, and this emphasis on being at home and getting treatment while you're living amongst family who care about you. Yeah. This isn't the reality for the people living on the street in San Francisco.
Well, and what's the word? When, we all have a basic right to, you have a purpose in life and you mean something and you matter.
You have dignity.
Dignity. Thank you. That's
yeah.
what I was looking for.
Right.
These people do not live a life of dignity.
No, they've been robbed of their dignity. To
the point where people don't even smile.
No.
And make eye contact.
Yep.
Because they're afraid. And I get that too.
Right.
I get it.
Yep.
I get it.
Right. Yeah. We're going to talk about that in the next episode. Yeah.
It's just seen as it's their fault.
Yeah.
It's seen, again, the stigma, the shame, and the parent must have done something. How bad this is brought to the family.
Well, that's what we do, I think, as human beings, is that when we're inundated with these images, with like seeing this on a daily basis, which in San Francisco we are.
Yeah.
I work downtown.
Yeah.
We have to. I don't do it, but I can understand why people do. It's a psychological like defense mechanism. I have to tell myself something so that I don't feel too deeply, because if I do, this is going to fuck me up.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to walk by and act like I don't see this person. And that's not the solution.
No,
it's really not. So, what we're going to talk about in part 2 is
looking forward to part 2, guys.
Part 2 is going to be amazing. Sorry, we've gone down a very serious path here, but I think this is something that needs to be discussed. Absolutely.
And we talk about this more than any other topic we talk about.
Yeah. And I work in government and I see how hard people are trying, but there's a component that I see that's missing. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode. And I can see why that component people are reticent to implement, but it needs to be implemented. And that component's called conservatorship, and long-term care. But yeah, that's the emphasis, right? What about these folks who have no family to take care of them and help them with day-to-day activities like taking their medication to ensure that they don't have psychotic episodes, right?
Or they're dual diagnosis and they have these illnesses and they've been self-medicating,
right?
Alcohol and drugs.
Absolutely.
And now they're seen again. Or they're criminals.
Yep.
So it's just so vicious.
We're going to talk about that cycle. We're going to talk about that cycle of living on the street. Yeah. Going into the jails, maybe temporarily going into one of the few psych beds we have in San Francisco, and then going back out onto the street, and the cycle, the terrible, inhumane, human rights crisis that this cycle is. So that's what we're going to talk about in the next episode. So we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening, and have a good night, everybody.
Good night.